You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to tell you that Michelob Ultra, the official beer partner of the NBA, is bringing NBA fans closer than ever this season with chances to win great prizes, including courtside tickets. Enter now at michelobultra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Courtside 25 to 26. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 plus. Begins on October 1st, 2025 and ends on June 30th, 2026. Multiple entry periods. See official rules at michelobultra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, prizes, and details.
Okay, I find I'm commenting on a lot of TV recently. There's a lot of history on TV, so that's great. Ken Burns' American Revolution has come out, generated a little bit of controversy. We're going to discuss it. I have opinions on it. The interesting thing will be where I diverge from the Ken Burns documentary is not what seems to be the major controversy on the internet, but it's something else that people aren't really talking about much and isn't as controversial. Okay, so let's start with Ken Burns' documentary, American Revolution. I think you should see it if you have not. Did I learn much from it? Maybe a few little things. It's just an area that I've read about and studied so much, the American Revolution, that, I didn't gain as much. And I found myself pining for it to mention a few things more than it did. One of the critiques of Ken Burns' documentary is that it starts with a mention of the Iroquois Confederacy, the tribal nations in upstate New York and what is now the Midwest and Canada, that and their role in the American Revolution, and then blends it into Ben Franklin talking about them, and then Ben Franklin and the Albany Confederation, and then the English settlers in the various colonies meeting with each other, and therefore suggesting and implying that the Iroquois Confederacy led to the American Revolution. And in the past, I've dealt with this question on my podcast. Did the Iroquois Confederacy lead to the American Constitution? So you have particularly like McLaughlin in the New Republic, no, the Iroquois Confederation did not start the American Revolution. It wasn't based on the Iroquois Confederacy, like Ken Burns says. And I think what most of the critiques do is put words in Ken Burns' mouth that the documentary does not say. What it merely does is imply a connection in some very light way, or it really adds it as a flavor or preface in the beginning of the documentary in talking about this Confederacy, and then talking about Ben Franklin, who in his 1751 letter to Parker, which is his printer, says, if these Indians can get together and meet, why can't we? And then a couple of years later, you have the Albany Conference. It's 20 years after that some of the Revolutionary War events happen, that the shooting starts happening in Lexington and Concord. So it might be a stretch to say that any of this is related. But the factual presentation that Burns makes is correct, that Franklin indeed did say it. So he got a spark of some nature from hearing about these Indians meeting, and at least using it as a lever for English settlers or British settlers to say, hey, why can't we do the same? Franklin's only one founder, but he is a founder. No one can argue with that, but he's only one. And there were a lot of people who didn't like Franklin. He had two different factions in Philadelphia, at least, and he was on one of them. And he was, in London for a long time. So you can't say that just because you have Franklin and quote him on something, that led to the American Revolution being based on it. And I've debunked that theory in the past because I believe examples like the Roman Republic, Cato the Elder in that play, you see references to that throughout the American Revolution, references to Rome over Carthage and things like that. The Dutch Republic and the fact that the Dutch had already thrown off the yoke of a larger power, the Spanish, and also had fought the British at different times and developed a worldwide sea trade, a huge financial center, and independence, and a form of democracy and are definitely a republic with no king. So that's a easier example to point to for the American colonists and also for the constitutional debates later than just having to have this confederacy that developed in the woods. But the point is, Burns didn't really say it. It's just a sort of thing that was implied. What did Burns do right in this context? Establishing the overall context that Indians are important, the Indian nations are important, that the American Revolution exists where there are French and Spanish and Indian actors affecting what they're doing and what really is at the time of 1775 and 1776, still a pretty thin settlement stretched across the coastal area of the continent. Very dependent on maritime trade for its economy. So it's really important to put the American Revolution in that context, and also to say that part of the reason for revolution is not just about taxes. The tax on tea, that's a small thing compared to, say, the Proclamation line, which totally limited where the American colonists saw their future. That their future was going to be limited, that they would have nothing to give their sons and their grandsons. That investors in America, George Washington being a prominent one among them, would have no future place of investment. That whoever was powerful now would be powerful in the future. Because the Proclamation line limited where they could settle. And the British were prepared to protect that land that currently was with Indian nations. Now, whether the British always would have kept it Indian land, tried to settle in a different way, we don't know. But the Ken Burns documentary does make that point pretty well, and I think they do a good job with that. There's also things that I don't hear mentioned, like the Iron Act, where Americans were prevented from having forges, limiting the amount of iron that they could produce, which meant that they couldn't defend themselves as well, but also meant they couldn't have that early kind of industrial revolution that was starting to happen because Britain wanted them to be a dependent mercantile colony. And that's a very important reason for the revolution. These colonists wanted independence, not just for the sake of it, not just for the sake of the philosophical principle, but also the economics of wanting to be able to trade with other nations, including the nation's colonies in the West Indies, the Dutch and French colonies in the West Indies, to have multiple sources of tea, not just one, to avoid the kind of monopolies that can happen when a king appoints a governor, a company, a charter, all of these things that the king can do with his realm. Getting tired of seeing these people coming and saying, I'm the governor now, and, this person will be working for me, and it'll come from your local taxes and things like that. So I think that all of those reasons combined. The possibility of future wars is something that Thomas Paine, for instance, mentions in his Common Sense, that if you're connected to a kingdom, there's a greater chance of war than what may benefit the actual American colonies. If you're independent, it's going to be up to what you think benefits you. So Burns does a good job in expressing that desire for land and land growth is an important reason for the American Revolution. Does it present it as taking American lands? Yes, it very much does. There were people who were occupying this area, and that was going to have to be dealt with. And in fact, as the documentary correctly shows, you have the Sullivan expedition and an attempt to take the land even before the revolution ends, so that there would be a future claim as the war's end is being negotiated. Burns correctly establishes this is a long war. He establishes how violent the war is, how internally violent it is, that within our own states and colonies that people were killing each other, removing, how bad it was for loyalists, removing them from their houses. However, This is my point where I disagree a lot with the presentations. I'm not a big fan of the theory that the American Revolution was a civil war, and there's a simple reason for that. The numbers don't add up to me to be a civil war. Now, it is a situation where there is a sizable minority and a persistent minority, a strong feeling minority that are loyalist in the nations, in the various states, let's say. Of course. And they're important, and particularly, and you see this in Burns, I think the biggest contribution that American loyalists make is in guidance and advisory capacity for the British. You see several times there's some loyalist showing the British Army how to sneak up the secret pass and get an advantage, totally erasing what would have been the territorial advantage, that territorial knowledge that Americans would have in most battles, having lived here with their families for a century or more. You know, a few loyalists betraying the Patriot Army. We were able to show in Brandywine and in New York in various ways have the British how to get around and to equalize that advantage. But again and again, British generals were disappointed with loyalist regiments, how few there were, how few would come to drill, and how really they weren't able to use them much and had to increase the requests to London for more troops and increase the requests to Hesse for more Hessian soldiers as well. So I get it that there were some violent acts between people. I get it that it's good, and I see where Burns sees it as a useful corollary to our times to say that this was a divided time too in the 1770s, and look at us now, and I get all of that, but to really that Civil War theory, I know there's been a recent H.W. Brand's book. This is a way that a lot of history is being taught, that it was America's first Civil War. But I think that you're talking about a smaller number of loyalists than a true Civil War should be. It doesn't have to be 50-50, but it should be closer, where both sides in a Civil War should be pretty meaningful for that to be a true Civil War. And here's the core of my argument. It would be if it truly was a civil war on the American continent. Well, there'd be no need for redcoats, and certainly no need for tens of thousands of German mercenaries. And they're not true mercenaries, I get it. It's an alliance that the Hesse has with Britain. But there would be no need for those foreign armies. And so in the American Civil War, you didn't have North fighting South along with an army from Britain, say, right? You had North versus South. In the American Revolution, the status quo was patriot, as we would now describe it. I get it that patriot's a subjective term. It's patriot as we would now describe it, meaning that if nothing else happened, if London decided, okay, cool, we don't like it, but we're not sending any ships or armies over, what would happen in each of those 13 colonies is they would become 13 states, and the political force that would control each one of them, including the middle states so frequently mentioned in this discussion, like Pennsylvania, what would control each one of them would be a, quote, patriot government in that state, and they would be the power that would run those states to come. The minority would be grumbling. Some would go to London, whatever, but that's what would happen. Instead, you have a history where a large flotilla of ships arrived from, as the people living in British North America would have viewed it, a foreign force, or at best an illegal force, as the Massachusetts people viewed it, a force against their charter, even if Parliament voted for it. Foreign troops, including Hessian mercenaries, without which I think it would have been a lot harder for the British to even have some of the successes that they had. The Hessians were very good fighters. So, not much, to me, it wasn't a civil war as much as it was a war between patriots here and the British troops, along with Hessian mercenaries, putting it down with some assistance from a 10, 15% of population and many who had left. Today's show is brought to you by Vanguard. To all the financial advisors listening, let's talk bonds for a minute. Capturing value in fixed income is not easy. Bond markets are massive, murky, and let's be real, lots of firms throw a couple of flashy funds your way and call it a day. But not Vanguard. Lots of firms love to highlight their star portfolio managers, like it's all about that one brilliant mind making the magic happen. Vanguard's philosophy is a little different. They believe the best active strategy shouldn't be locked away with one person. They should be shared across the team. That way, every client benefits from the collective brain power, not just one individual's take. So if you're looking to give your clients consistent results year in and year out, go see the record for yourself at vanguard.com/audio. That's vanguard.com/AUDIO. All investing is subject to risk. Vanguard Marketing Corporation Distributor. It is a civil war in the sense of how bad people were to each other on the ground. But the numbers don't really make it a true civil war. That adds to the understanding of what was happening during that revolution. And if you go back to 1775 and Thomas Paine's pamphlet is being passed in every tavern in America, and there's a big patriot fever, most of the direction was going that way until the British forced it in every case where it happened to the other direction. If loyalists controlled an area, it's because British redcoats were there. In most cases, you have little things like, yes, it's true, there's areas of North Carolina and South Carolina where we had age-old disagreements between backwoods and the coastal elites, and that's shown in the series, but not true civil war. So I have an issue with that. I have a very little issue. This is nitpicky. But when I hear about the tar and feathering, and then they're talking about how it was burning people, oh my God, they were boiling their skin. I'm sure in a few cases it happened. But that would very much be doing, I'm sorry to say, tar and feathering wrong. So tar and feathering is meant to be a humiliation. It's not fun. It would have been a horrible event that would have certainly psychologically scarred a person who was tarred and feathered, and they might be beat up as well. So this isn't exactly a fun day for somebody who was a stamp tax collector or somebody who was a loyalist who got tarred and feathered, because there could be additional punishments dealt out. But in the actual tar and feathering, that's not boiling or burning the person's skin. Pine tar is used on ships as a way of waterproofing them. Its heating level is the same. I mean, it might be 10 degrees more than the hot water on your shower. So it's not, hot water is 100, 110 degrees. This could be 120, 130 to heat up pine tar. And and that doesn't mean they're always putting it on immediately after they've heated up. So pine tar isn't boiling. So that wasn't accurate what they were describing, but it is humiliating. And certainly they're going to parade people around the town. And it's a terrible, people were terrible to each other during the American Revolution. That part Burns got right. So a little nitpicky on the whole tar and feathering thing. With that, I think you should see the series. I think it's great. I was so glad they mentioned the Forage War of 1777. I think it was a key event where, particularly in New Jersey, food and supply was denied to garrisons, and we turned the British occupation in the state of New Jersey into a kind of Vietnam for them. They could not feed their garrisons. They were afraid at night to even post, and they had to withdraw to just a couple from their plan to have garrisons almost every couple of miles, every, say, 10, 15 miles throughout the state, to have a garrisoned force from New York to Philadelphia they could really only have a few key towns, New Brunswick, Perth Amboy, and had to give up on the rest of it. I've reposted my episode on the Forage War, so you can listen to it. It's the episode before this. With that, I want to thank you for listening, and, we got some good episodes coming up. I'm making progress on the Zachary Taylor series. It's going to be a 3-parter. Those of you on Patreon, www.myhistorycanbeatupyourpolitics, have already heard it. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here, wishing you a very happy half-off holiday, because right now Mint Mobile is offering you the gift of 50% off unlimited. To be clear, that's half price, not half the service. And Mint is still premium unlimited wireless for a great price. So that means a half day, yeah?
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.